Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I know it's early here. I'm sure you got up early as well where you are. And I'm just excited to help you understand how to protect your kids and any other children in your life. My passion is to tell good stories. But when I got into human trafficking education, what I realized is the greatest story there is one that never happens. And what I mean by that is we protect our children and we love them deeply. And what we never want to happen to them is a story that might sometimes draw us to watch it on television. We want our children's stories to be ones of safety, love, adventure. We want our children's stories to be ones where they're the hero, they're the one rescuing, not the one that needs to be rescued. I won't go into a lot of time explaining how I got involved in human trafficking. It's more important that I get to my message today. But what I want to encourage you as a parent is just to listen and know that I have provided a guide to what I'm going to talk about on my website. So I will go ahead and start sharing my screen. And there we are. It should work. I just have to allow this. All right, it should be sharing. Hopefully, Matt will let me know. Sure. Okay. So I hope that you can see this. Please let me know. So here's my screen, and I will start going through this. First of all, our website has resources for anyone who wants to visit it. They are free, and you can just go into our website for lots of different downloads on grooming, on how to keep your children safe, and just how to even have conversations with them about what we're going to talk about today. But first of all, I've already given you my information. My name is Parenzini. I live in the United States. I started a project called the America Unchained Project, where I go and I let different professionals know how to spot human trafficking on the job. But my latest passion is educating parents because we need to know how to protect the kids in our home. So today I'm going to talk about how to understand child abuse and child neglect, and how understanding those two things can help you protect the kids in your life. So my first thing I want to talk about is you. I want to give you a message today. And that message today is one of encouragement and one of intentionality. We want to love our children well, but part of loving them well is guarding them well. If a child goes through life feeling neglected, feeling unloved, feeling unwanted, then they are far more prone to abuses, whether they're in a relationship or whether they're even in their mind. They can create a world of someone else's lies rather than one of love that you've established. So I just want to encourage you as you listen today. This is not a talk of telling parents they've done anything wrong. This is a talk of saying we just need to be more aware of the people out there trying to get to our children because it is their full-time job. The people who prey on children, it is literally how they make money. This is an industry that is global, and it is worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. They prey on vulnerable children who maybe don't feel loved or who aren't supervised well, who maybe have experienced abuse and neglect, or maybe they're just struggling with what the world calls mental health. These people who are trying to get to your children are fed by dollars, and all they see this as is a business. So what we're going to do as parents is we're going to be more aware of how we treat our children, checking in with them and making sure they feel loved. And we're going to prevent anything that within our grasp of making our children vulnerable. So I want to talk about first the definition of terms. It's very important that when I say a word, you understand what I'm saying. So in my line of work, I work a lot with medical professionals, law enforcement officers, teachers, and of course, parents. But what I've learned is sometimes when we use terminology, someone's ear is defining that different than someone else in the room. So I always like to start by defining my terms. And we're going to talk about the difference between child neglect and child abuse. So the definition of child neglect is simply not meeting the basic needs of a child. That could be physical needs like food, shelter, water. It could be medical. It could be educational, and it can be emotional. Now, there's different terminology for child abuse. Child abuse fits into two different categories. They can be medical or psychological, and it can also be a legal term. We aren't going to weigh ourselves down too much today about legal terminology, but we are going to make sure that we understand the effects on a child's mind and their soul when they experience abuse. So there is a legal term for child abuse. It's defined in Article 19 of the UNCRC as all forms of physical or mental violence, injury or abuse, neglect or negligent treatment, maltreatment or exploitation, including sexual abuse. That's a very, very specific definition. But when people are enforcing laws, they have to define their terms. What we're actually more concerned about today is the psychological definition of child abuse. Now, abuse, of course, is harm to a child caused by a parent or any other caregiver. It could be physical violence, sexual violence, psychological. It can also be neglect. But I think the more important definition is one that a lot of psychologists define it as, a lot of counselors define it as. And it's any repeated pattern of behavior that terrorizes a child. So this can be, of course, physical abuse. This can be sexual abuse. It can even be threats of physical abuse. When a child is threatened with something, if they don't participate in something or they don't accomplish a goal, that is also a form of child abuse. It can be subjective abuse, things like verbal comments. It can be relational with from them or the perceived withholding of love from them. It can be emotional abuses. Now, neglect comes in different forms. So there's the physical neglect, the actual absence. And I would even say, if we're not careful, this can also be just being there but not being present. So if you fail to provide food or shelter or supervision for a child, that is considered a neglect. In medical sense of neglect, it's not providing the medical needs necessary for a child to remain healthy. And of course, the educational neglect would be not to attend special education or to not attend school at all and to not allow a child to be educated. And then, of course, emotional neglect. This can be one that is overlooked, and that's why I put it on one full page. We need to focus on this one because often this one truly is one of the biggest keys in making children vulnerable to outside abuses, trafficking, and exploitation. Emotional abuse is defined as the inattention to a child's emotional needs or the failure to provide psychological care, or, and this is one that's frequently overlooked, allowing a child to use alcohol or drugs. Now, that was neglect. Now we're going to talk about abuse. So physical abuse, of course, is when a child is non-accidentally injured. It is done on purpose to them. Sexual abuse, as you would imagine, is any sexual act at all between an adult and a child. Now, I'm going to list what this means, and I know this list can make people uncomfortable, but it's important we know it. This can include penetration, fondling, intercourse. This can also include exploitation, making a child do something for a reward or making them do something sexual for a threat. This also includes pornography, both the creation of pornography or forcing a child to watch pornography. Exhibitionism, if an adult is exposing themselves or being highly sexualized in front of a child, this can actually be a form of sexual abuse. Child prostitution, group sex, oral sex, or again, forced observation of sexual acts. Then there is, of course, emotional abuse. So this is an attitude or a behavior that interferes with a child's mental health or social development. If you're yelling, if you're screaming, if you're name calling or shaming. Now remember, it may not be an adult doing this to a child. This could be done by children as well. And if it happens repeatedly, it is a form of emotional abuse. So if they're ever told they're not good, they're not worthy, they were a mistake, this can give them shame, and it is a form of emotional abuse. So another thing that is an emotional abuse that, again, a lot of people overlook is the withholding of affection. And a lot of times what this will do is damage their social, their physical, or their emotional development. A lot of people abuse children by withholding affection unless they attain a goal, upholding affection unless they are obedient. We should never, as parents, withhold affection from our child. I have 3 sons, and I understand there are days when it's crazy. It can feel frustrating to be a parent. You just want your child to behave. But one thing I learned as a child growing up in an emotionally abusive situation is there is never an excuse to not go to your child and show them love. You can still delineate what they did that was not okay and let them know there will be a consequence to an action they chose without making them feel threatened, without making them feel scared of you, and by letting them know that they are always loved. You want to be the place they run to when something's wrong. Just like if you had little children in your house, they want to run to mom and dad. And then they want to go away and they want to be adventurous and explore. And they want to run back to mom and dad. We want them to be like that their entire lives. So how much does this really happen? This is a very important question. So in the United States, the CDC says that at least 1 in 7 children have experienced child abuse or neglect this year. 1 in 7. So to put that in perspective, that is 15% of all children in the US have experienced abuse or neglect this year. And often these numbers are less than what they actually believe them to be because we can only tell you what's been reported. We cannot make up numbers. So this is a certifiable number via the CDC. This is not just a number we made up. But because so much neglect and abuse is never reported, we believe that number is far higher. According to the WHO, in the European region ranges, most children, 9.6 children, will experience sexual abuse. So boys experience 5.7% of that, and girls are much higher at 13.4%. 22.9% of children will experience physical abuse. And almost 30% of children will experience mental or emotional abuse. And this is a statistic that was also reported from Switzerland. 50,000 children are annually registered by the child protection authorities in Switzerland. And I want to point out that until 2019, just 3 years ago, in Switzerland, there was not a mandated reporter law for law enforcement, counselors, or doctors. So the mandated reporters have not been in effect very long, but there's still 50,000 children being annually taken in by the government there. So we need to be honest about the reality of the situation. So what I need you to know is that most victims usually know their abuser. It could be a family member, a teacher, a friend, someone that they've had a relationship with. They usually know their abuser, which can be very frightening to think about as a parent. Abuse can happen anywhere. It can happen at school, in an institution. It can happen at home, at a neighbor's home, at a relative's home. We need to be honest with ourselves and realize that abuse doesn't happen in one specific place or by any specific group. It could be anyone the child knows at any location. And abuse can be long-term or short-term. It's not necessarily something that is just instantaneous. So the effects on a child can be extensive. The effects of a child, we want to know what those are because we want to understand that these can be ongoing. They're not always easy to fix. So the first thing is their physical health. It can make a child not want to eat. It can affect their body. It can affect their growth. It can actually literally affect them physically if they're being physically abused, of course, with any sort of bruising, any sort of damage, anything that might be happening there. Their mental health. A child who's simply trying to survive the day cannot invest in education well. They cannot achieve goals well. They find themselves sad or anxious. They're often very obsessive about how they look. They're constantly worrying if people can possibly see any bruising on their arm. And their self-worth is so low that often they just go through the day a little bit in a bubble, in their own thoughts, rather than happy and secure and playful. They often seem fearful and sad. Another thing is, of course, childhood trauma. If this continues throughout their lives, it can follow them into adulthood and actually become what we know as trauma. And that can come out later in life as violence or alcohol abuse or even self-harm. We mentioned, of course, mental health, but we also want to talk about brain development. Children who experience abuse and neglect, their actual brain does not develop according to how it should. It can cause cognitive abilities and delays. It can cause what in America we call learning disabilities. It can delay their language skills. And of course, it can actually have them regress backwards. Social difficulties. They may not blend into their peer group. They may feel bullied. It's almost like children who are abused have a target on their back, the way they carry themselves. And it can cause them to have their own behavioral issues, of course, acting out, being angry, or just a temperament that doesn't make sense to other people. So how does this all come together for human trafficking and sexual exploitation? What is the link? Well, there's one clear link, and we'll get to that in a moment. But here's some statistics. 57% of prostitutes were sexually abused as children. Almost 90% of commercially sexually exploited youth, they have a history of child abuse. And why is that? Well, like I said, sometimes it's because they have a target on their back. A lot of times it's because it's all they know is being abused. So seeing someone else abuse them, they don't understand healthy relationships. So it links so easily to being abused continually through life. But the number one reason that children who are abused and neglected are often continuing in that lifestyle of some form of abuse and neglect is vulnerability. They're incredibly vulnerable because they want to be loved. They want to be accepted. And because they do not have value for themselves. They've been told or shown their whole life they aren't worthy of attention. They aren't worthy of time. They aren't worthy of education. They aren't worthy of physical touch. So they're incredibly vulnerable. And again, how does this link directly? Well, as I said earlier, traffickers and groomers, their entire purpose is to spend effort, time, money, and energy finding your child and using them to make them money. So a vulnerable child who wants love is very susceptible to grooming. Groomers make a child feel as if they are loved and that they're special, that they're beautiful, that they're smart. And what they do is they show them love or what the child perceives to be love. And of course, they're lying to them the entire time. And then once that child receives affection or gifts or is emotionally bonded with this groomer, they turn the tables on them and they expect something in return. Another link to exploitation that makes a child vulnerable is longing for a family. Every human being wants to be accepted, wants to be loved, and wants to be cherished. But if they feel like they are rejected by their family, that they can't be themselves in their family, then what ends up happening is that longing can be used by a trafficker to make them feel like they're in a family. Now, we know it's a dysfunctional lie, that it's not true. But children are vulnerable because they are children and they don't understand. And they long for love so deeply that they take this false love, what we know as abuse, and they think that they're a part of something that is a family. Another way that children of abuse and neglect are vulnerable is when they run away from home. When children are taken out of a home, or they run away from an abusive situation and they live in a homeless environment, they are incredibly susceptible for someone to come to them and exchange affection and love to them in exchange for sexual acts of some kind. So children, again, they're vulnerable. They don't have shelter or food. They don't have a family if they're on the street. If they run away or are experiencing homelessness, they can feel desperate. And if they've already been abused, even if it's emotionally, a groomer can use sexual acts to have them pay for things like food and shelter and other things. So I want to end on this one reminder. We should love our children unconditionally. We should show them affection even if they've disappointed us. We are the ones who provide them a safe haven and a safe place to go, whether it's for their mind, their body, or their heart. I want to say that being a parent is hard. There's no perfect parent out there. There's none. Maybe your parent was harsh. Mine was. Maybe your parent didn't know how to love you well. Mine didn't. I never felt like I was enough. I made straight A's in my school. I did very well at school. I never felt like I was enough. I got a lead in a play. I never felt like I was enough. It was so rare for my mom to show me love and affection. She never told me really that she was proud of me. I don't remember that when I was younger. She didn't touch me or hold me. She rarely said, "I love you." Now, I understand that she was raised by a man who was much worse. But I encourage you, if you didn't receive love growing up and you don't know how to love well, learn. Take a risk. Touch your child's hand. Let your touch be the warmest, safest, most loving touch they know. So that when a counterfeit tries to come into their life, they know the difference. They know you are the one who loves them. Child abuse and neglect, again, not necessarily by a parent. It can be by someone outside. It could be a teacher. It could be another person in their family. It could be a peer. But it creates something in a child that makes them feel unloved and unvalued. But if you are always there to remind them they are loved, they are valued, they have purpose, then I promise you, you are safeguarding your child from ever being taken into this world of trafficking. I want to remind you that I do have a website. Everything there is free. And that the guide to what we talked about today is more thorough than the slides are on this page. And it will explain everything I talked about in greater detail. So thank you so much for your time. This was wonderful to be here. And I hope that you learned something. Please come tomorrow to the talk where we have a talk back, and I will be there to answer any questions you might have had. Thank you so much.